on, and then YouTube streaming is starting now. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. YouTube streaming is starting now. Yeah, I started. Okay. Good morning. How are you? How do you feel? Tired? It's okay? Yeah. Good, good. I know that yesterday has been quite a long, dense day, and today I think will be the same. I hope you had the possibility not only to rest, but also to digest a little bit the concepts we shared yesterday. And I think there are advantages and disadvantages to have dense webinars. Of course, the advantage is that we concentrate in just one place and in one moment, in one event, many different perspectives. And this is the main reason we thought this multidisciplinary webinar should go together. The disadvantage is that it's very, very heavy. But you are trained, I think. I mean, you are the PhD students of this big PhD course. Okay, now I see that we are already a good number. And let me project very quickly. No, first, let me ask, I know that some of you had problems with downloading the recordings. I now also put the passcode that I forgot to put in the file I gave you. Just tell me if there are problems. If there are problems to download. Did you try any problem? Any critical aspects related with the files? No. Okay. So everything is smooth. Okay. Very well.
Yeah, I guess, Professor, can you hear me?
Yes.
I tried to access to the record, but it doesn't work. They told that the passcode is wrong. I don't know why.
Okay, I need to check the passcode then again, because I tried to deactivate the passcode. Then he says that there should be a passcode in any case. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'll try to check the passcode, because the problem is that when I go there, because I have the credential to access that, it doesn't ask me any passcode. So I'll try now to log in with a different name and see if it asks me the passcode. Okay. Thank you, and sorry. I'll check. I'll check
no
soon.
Problem. Thank you.
Did you have problem with the test yesterday?
No.
No? Okay. Was that useful?
Yes, very useful.
Okay. Okay, thank you to everybody. So we can then start the recording. Okay, good morning to everybody. Let me project very briefly the program for today. And you see there is an introduction, and now I will introduce you, Donatella. Then we have presentations and discussion slots. As you see, we have Donatella will go into the details, so let's just anticipate this. And at the end, we have also a overall discussion and some conclusions made by Pierpaolo Roggero. So I thank you very much for your participation. And let me now give the floor to Donatella Spano, that I say hello to Donatella. Donatella Spano is professor in agrometeorology and ecophysiology of agricultural forestry ecosystems at the University of Sassari, and is also the scientific coordinator of a PhD in these topics, and is member of the Euro-Mediterranean Center of Climate Change She's a founding member and a member of the Strategic Council. She teaches many things related with the impact of climate change on agriculture, and especially adaptation strategy. I thank very much Donatella for his participation to this PhD program. She has been a very active member, I have to say. We had many chats with her because she believes in this project, and I really thank you, Donatella, for your contribution. So the floor is yours, Donatella.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you for your very nice introduction, very kind from you. And I don't know if you see my screen.
Yeah, very well. Everything is set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And first, I wanted to welcome everybody, especially the students, because these days are for them. But let me thank also the colleagues that contribute to the organization of all these events, and also the external attendees, because we have also people that are external to this PhD program, especially from our local PhD programs at our own universities. And we are very glad to have also a big audience that are interested in this new experiment, that is the new PhD program. And special thanks to the speakers that have accepted our invitation. So yesterday you had the first day of these common seminars, and today we focus more on agriculture and forestry issues. So it's the curriculum number 5. But just for those who are not familiar with this PhD, let me just remember that this is the first national PhD program that is coordinated by the School for Advanced Studies, use of Pavia, and includes 30 universities, several departments, a huge academic staff with all the facilities. And so I have to say that we are very proud, as Mario said, that we were able to create a network, such a rich network in Italy for the first time. And sorry if I recall some concepts that are very familiar now, I think, for our students, but the objectives of our program is to propose a new development model to address climate change and its impact. But with the view of sustainable development. And the second objective is to build a research community of not only students, but academic people, staff, and also people from even private companies. I think that this is a very important point to build a new society. And so to develop new models and create a new network of a research community are the two big challenges and objectives of our program. And there are two, and all the program is based on two pillars: the educational program and the research programs. And these two pillars have to conduct to the success of our PhD program. The PhD program, as you know, includes one core topic that is sustainable and sustainable development and climate change, but with the contribution of 6 curriculum that are to create the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary network and community. So, as we say, also yesterday was clearly explained, the educational program has different parts, and in particular some that are common, that are horizontal and common to all the curriculum. Some are vertical, based on the specific curriculum, and that are listed here, and some are focuses on a specific topic that are characteristics of each curriculum, so are characterized by each curriculum. And in this week events, we are in the framework of multidisciplinary events, as Mario mentioned, and we think that this part is very fundamental, very important, because all the candidates are exposed to the complexity of the topics related to sustainability and climate change. And then there will be events that are specific of each scientific curriculum, and some selection of thematic and methodological courses that can be followed by the students of each curriculum, and in general they are offered by the host university. So this, what I said, was related to the educational program, but we have the research program that is a very important part, and it's the part where the PhD students are really the actor. They are the main character of this all this program, and it means to interact and to create multi and interdisciplinary research for achieving the goal of the UN agenda. And in particular, it means to put together all the knowledge about climate, but about the specific knowledge of sectors to reach, to achieve the SDG agenda. And the students, as I said, are the main parts of this network and this research community we are creating. So it's very important that they exchange ideas, that they exchange results of their experiment, and also don't stop to be curious about what other students are doing, what is going on in the experiment and in the research program of each other. In terms of the curriculum 5 that focus on agriculture and forestry, the main objective is the innovative models to create innovative model to make the agri-food and forestry system more resilient and sustainable. And all these issues, all these objectives are based on 13 students. Sorry if I give you so much responsibility in that, but we really trust in your work. And we have, as I said, 13 students based in 9 universities, and with a very good gender balance. So we are very happy for this. I'm in particular very happy. Let me just say a few words about some aspects that are in particular, they fit with all the sectors, but in particular with our curriculum, because we need to work on different aspects, and also create innovative language, and also innovative tools to analyze our different sectors. And in particular, because we need to work to contribute to the ecological transitions, we need to take advantages from climate science, and the contribution of climate science is fundamental because it's based on several expertise and represent a meeting point for all researchers who deal with the science related to climate and its applications. And our sector needs a lot of climate application, and also needs scientific progress and innovations that can be offered only by the convergence of discipline and multidisciplinary research. Another point is the new paradigm that is offered by a different approach to consider environmental studies. And in particular, the emerging holistic paradigm known as One Health means people's health is strongly connected to the health of animals and the environment. And the actual pandemic is an example of this concept. Here in particular, the One Health concept is represented through the potential nexus among land use change, food system, and the coronavirus. So the new paradigm creates multiple benefits. It can help to mitigate the risk associated with the anthropized environment. And also, in this analysis, we should consider climate change impacts. And to deal with the climate change, we need clearly to consider the socioeconomic development pathway. Yesterday, I think that especially in the first part, a lot of these aspects were clarified. So socioeconomic pathway, from that depends the emission and the greenhouse gas concentration that cause the climate change, so the increased temperature, the precipitation pattern, drought, flood, so all of the extreme events that we see every day. And all these have impact on human activities and ecosystem services. So all these, how can we deal with climate change? We can deal thinking about adaptation and mitigation option, and integrate in the most effective and efficient way these two aspects, mitigation and adaptation, that offer two different solutions, but they have to be complementary. So adaptation means to manage what is unavoidable, and mitigation means to avoid the unmanageable. Another aspect is that dealing with the climate change means also to action, that the action must be tailored to specific territorial and socioeconomic conditions, and also requires a very strong coordination between the various institutional levels at vertical and horizontal level. So we need to find a very good balance and interaction between scientific community and policymakers. So the scientific research should have some priorities, and in particular, dealing with climate change, we need to have innovative technologies. So the development of innovative technologies is very important, and also search for new integrated and adaptive tool that clearly involves the scientific community, but involves also stakeholders and policymakers. And it's the only way to achieve the goals. And so from your research programs, and I'm talking in particular to the students, we expect that you contribute to better understand the vulnerability and the risk components that are related to climate change, to help. That means to help to assess impact and risk, and also to get useful information at a different scale, but also at a local scale, to better addressing climate risk for specific sectors. And this can be very useful for build strategy and plans for adaptation. And also we need the results from your work to support the policies and also to better communicate the climate change risk and awareness. So at the end, what we expect is to contribute with the new tools, or improving the tools in all aspects of the tools and methodologies we need for better understand and deal with the climate change, in particular in our sectors that are agriculture, forestry, etc. But in general, in all sectors. And so we expect that you can help contribute in all the tool chain that we need, including socioeconomic models, earth system models, regional climate models that we need for understand better local issues. And also we need to have bias correction, again, for a better understand of the local characteristics, and we needed to improve our capacity of assessing model impact, and so to reach the most important result, that is to help building adaptation and mitigation options that are tailored for each territories. So I hope that this will be in your mind, and that you really contribute, and with clearly also with our help and our experience that we put to you, we offer to you, but we also needed to learn from you. So it's very important, the relationship between academic staff, students, and all together to create a very active community. And this is my message. Before starting with the program of today's program, that includes 3 presentations, 3 lectures from 3 international speakers, and and they are related, one to plant, one to livestock, one to agriculture systems, and each one will be presented by one of our colleague, and so each colleague will introduce the topic and the speaker, and then conduct the discussion. So I really like to thank you for your participation, for have chosen this PhD program, and again, you are really welcome to in our community. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Michele Frapaz for the first presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Donatella, for this very nice overview about our PhD. And I try to share my screen. I think it's my time. Okay, so I hope you can see it. So I'm Michele Frapaz. I'm professor in soil science, no science, at the University of Torino, and I'm member of the teaching staff of this PhD. And of course, today we have a pleasure to introduce a great scientist, and above all a friend, with Christian Rixen. Christian Rixen is a senior researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research at WSL in Switzerland, and he's a member of the Mountain Ecosystems Group. It's a group of research of scientists which focus on mountain ecosystems above and below the tree line, so especially mountain forests and pine ecosystems. He's a specialist in Arctic and alpine vegetation and interaction between plants and the environment. He traveled a lot all over the world doing his research, so I'm sure he will describe very well what he did in the past years, what maybe he's going to do in future. He is the member of the Terrestrial Working Group in the International Arctic Science Committee. He has, of course, a long curriculum. I don't want to stress you with all the details, but of course, I just try to extrapolate what I consider the most important issue. And of course, he's a contributing author of an IPCC report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. So also is very focused on climate change impacts on mountain ecosystems, especially on plants. Of course, Christian is much more. Last but not least, I know he's a great ornithologist. He's a great backcountry skier, a beach volleyball player, and many other things. I'm sure that we will have a lot of fun during his presentation. So I don't want to waste more time, and I give the floor to Christian. I will just wait with the end of his presentation to organize a general discussion about his presentation. So be ready to put questions to Christians, and we will try to do our best to manage the discussion at the end of his presentation. So Christian, very thanks a lot and welcome, welcome, and I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Michele. Great to see you again, even if it's only online.
It's great.
Better than nothing. And thanks for the invitation. I think I should apologize for not speaking Italian. It feels like I'm the only one here who doesn't speak Italian.
Yeah, but I know that you know some words, at least ciao or buongiorno.
Some words, but that wouldn't help us a lot today. So,
actually, there are many PhD students coming from abroad. Hello, Christian, and welcome also from us.
I was expecting that. So in any case, I'll share screen and see how this works.
Great, we can see you, and maybe.
And someone was asking for please show full screen. I think this probably works now. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's perfetto, Christian. Go ahead.
Good, good. So thanks, Michele, for the introduction. I am a biologist, especially interested in plants, but you'll hear from a lot of other research activities from me and with colleagues as well. So I would like to start by saying how wonderful adapted our alpine plants are. Here you see one example of a Soldanella, which senses through the snow that the snow is melting and that the light is coming, and it is able to grow under the snow. It's 0 degrees there, and it can penetrate the snow and flower just to prolong the short growing season, the short time for flowering by a few days to be able to complete the life cycle, flower, produce seeds, etc. And there are other fascinating examples of alpine plants around the world. This is from South America, these cushion plants that sort of cuddle up, stick together in large cushions to enhance the temperature within the cushion a little bit, a few degrees above the temperature that you'd have in ambient conditions to collect a little bit more nutrients. So these are amazing adaptations to this alpine environment. Photo not from me, from a colleague in Russia, is something I was really amazed by. A plant that grows snow roots. That is to collect the nutrients from the snow cover when it melts in spring, early summer. There's a little bit of nutrients in the snow cover, and to collect these plants grow roots into the air to collect nutrients, and when the snow is gone, these roots will decay. So they form these roots only for a few days during snowmelt to collect nutrients in this nutrient-poor system. Or another simple example here in the Alps from a buttercup, a plant flowering in summer, being frozen over. We as humans like to think that this environment up there is ghastly and cold. To these organisms, it's perfectly normal. This plant will survive this frost. I'm not sure if it produces fruits this year, but probably next year. So it's completely normal to live in this environment for these specialized plants. But obviously we face dramatic changes on the planet. And to illustrate this, I'd like to change to YouTube real quick. There's a video that I really like. Let's see if this works. We all know this, but it's just really impressive to see this video and to see which regions on the globe have warmed in the past 50 or so, 50, 60 years. So here's in 1960 now. And you see the temperature anomalies globally. this only goes to 2013, so it's not even up to date, but you really see how the globe has changed, but especially the cold regions, the Arctic has changed a lot more. So there are really dramatic changes going on, especially where it's cold, and that's really relevant, where a lot of the carbon is stored on this planet. So this figure shows the carbon storage and the vulnerability of soil carbon stocks on the globe. And you really see that in the Arctic, the soil is full of carbon. And if this warms, if this carbon is mineralized, it will be released to the atmosphere and enhance the changes that we see anyway caused by humans. And just a photo to illustrate from the Arctic, a cliff on an island in northern Russia. You see that the cliff, the ground completely contains of carbon, of organic material. And if this melts and is released into the atmosphere, we add a lot to the CO2 in the atmosphere. The global anomalies you see here, you can see that in the last 30 years or so, we had an increase of about 1 degree Celsius, but you also see that the warming has actually started much earlier. We had the Little Ice Age, and this time, and already starting in the 1900s, we had warming. And I'll come back to this because we have some old plant data going back 170 years, where you can see this in the species composition of plants. But I'd first like to emphasize the point that cold regions are more affected by climate warming than the global average. Here you see, please excuse the German explanations, here you see the temperature anomalies of climate stations in Switzerland above 1,000 meters above sea level, so only the higher, colder stations. And here you see that the warming is rather 2 degrees than 1 degree. And when I compare the two figures, and I want to compare the axis, the y-axis here, I have to stretch this figure in a somewhat awkward way, simply to compare the dimension of climate warming. So you can see that it's about, you can see the noise, of course, with fewer climate stations, but you also see that the warming in the Alps is much more pronounced than the global average, and the same or even more this applies to the north, to the Arctic. But also the Alps are very much more affected by climate warming than the global average. What does this mean for our dear alpine plants that are so adapted to this environment? As I explained in the beginning, you can see this nice illustration from Christian Körner, what can happen in general. Plants and also other organisms can migrate uphill when it's getting warmer. For some species, they might be too high, they might get extinct. We don't really see evidence for this in the Alps yet, but this may change, of course, in the longer term. We also see this interesting arrow here. In mountains, we normally have spatial heterogeneity. So if you move 10 meters or something, you can find a much colder microsite. So for some animals or plants, it's maybe possible to migrate only a few meters to find a cooler spot to survive much longer than we anticipate. In many models we have, we predict the extinction of many alpine species, but that is normally not considering this heterogeneity of microsites. In this talk, I will present results from a lot of different studies, so bear with me. I know you are a heterogeneous audience. I hope I explained this well enough. If not, there's time to ask later on. But I will talk about mountaintops and very long-term monitoring studies where we can see the change of plants growing on these mountains over the last 170 years, like I say. So I'm gonna present warming experiments with the simple warming chambers here, which is a global initiative where we experimentally warm the Arctic and the tundra cold environments to see how plants respond to this. I will move, although it's not my expertise strictly, but I will move to remote sensing approaches, because that is an interesting means to, at a larger scale, detect changes in the Arctic, how it's getting greener, for instance. I will also speak about analysis of large data sets that are increasingly available. So when we analyze changes in communities over time, we can not only go to our small studies that we may have, but we can join forces and throw in data into global data sets and analyze changes in different ecosystems. But finally, I will come back to smaller scales. We here live in the Alps, and we have the possibilities with land use, for instance, to affect our environment. That is very important for biodiversity. So we face climate change, which is really important and a big threat, but also land use is really important for maintenance of biodiversity. So in the end, I'd like to come back to what we can do locally also to improve loss of biodiversity. But with that, I'd like to jump to my first study that is very dear to me, to early botanists that went up mountains and they really wanted to explore the limits of life. They wanted to know what grows, which plant species grow on the highest mountains. And one of those guys was Oswald Heer. He did this 170 years ago, and he went up this mountain, Pitzlinat. And in his field book, he makes a drawing at which elevation he finds which plant species. And at the very top, he finds Androsaceae alpina, plant that you see here, plant that also made it to the cover of a Nature issue. And what's really nice here is he recorded these plants 170 years ago, approximately. But after that, many other botanists went up there approximately every 20 or 30 years. I'll jump here real quick. So you can see that he was on this mountain in 1835 and found this one plant species. And then later, other botanists went up and the species number increased. And then it was quite stable for a while, 10 degrees. And then we're approaching the 90s. And then we can see that the species number further increased. That per se is, of course, not a bad thing. We have an increase of biodiversity here. But here it is more an indication of change in species composition due to climate change. And I'll go back real quick. If someone works with plants, one name is very famous there, Josias Braun-Blanquet. He was a famous botanist, and he was also on this mountain in the 1940s and 70s. He went up there 2 times, and he already writes a publication, sorry, this in German again, 1 century of species community change at Pitzlinat. So already he in the 40s, I think it is, in the 40s, he writes about climate change on this mountain. And today this is of course a big topic, but I think it's important to see that already these old botanists were aware of changes and climate-related changes of species communities. Good, that was an example of one mountain. That's great, but that's of course not great replication. But we found a lot more historical records of surveys on mountains. And we joined forces with other colleagues in Europe who did a similar approach and found historical surveys and went there to resurvey the species composition on these mountains. And in total, we have a data set of 300 summits covering over 100 years of data in numerous regions of Europe. So all the way north to Svalbard and south to the Pyrenees also, east to the Carpathians. And given on the data we have, of course, we cover different time periods. And what's also interesting is that we have a number of mountains where we not only have first survey and last survey, but where we have several surveys in between. So we can not only look at the change over 100 years, but also at the sort of a curve over time. And if we differentiate that, if we look at this across Europe, we see a very universal figure. In all of the mountain ranges, we have a change in species composition, an increase in species number because of upward migration of species. And this correlates really well with the increase of temperature over the time, which you see here. Where we have better data, that is more surveys in between, we can see sort of a hockey stick curve that we have an increase in species number, but that then this increase is particularly pronounced in the last 30 or so years, which is not too surprising, but it's I find it remarkable how rapidly those alpine plants respond to the changes. Just a sunny side aspect, it's funny that sometimes poets pick up science, so you can find this on the internet. Someone wrote a poem about this paper. So I'm going to read it out to you. He wrote, "Among the icy peaks and stony seas, we count the plants that call such heights a home, traversing every sudden gale and breeze to better understand how they have grown. Across the years of data in this zone, diversity increased at a quickened pace, accelerating at a speed unknown. So even in the most secluded place, we see the consequences of our global race." I just thought it was funny that someone writes a poem. And you can find more of this on the webpage. So I think it's brilliant. So I mentioned another important way to study climate change is, of course, in experiments that can speed up the process. And one famous and easy way is to build such little greenhouses that are open on top. We call them open top chambers, OTCs. The point they open is that they receive precipitation. We don't want plants to die from drought, but this little chamber is enough to warm the temperatures inside by a few degrees. And this is a common protocol developed over 30 years ago now. One of the earliest sites was here in Switzerland, and another site in Canada, one site in Sweden. But in total, we have a lot of sites all over the globe that have done such an experiment, and we can compare how much this warming affects the vegetation, if it's the same pattern everywhere, or if it differs between Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, and whatnot. One illustrative effect you see here from Greenland, where it's quite obvious how the plants get taller, which also has to do in this case with grazing from bees, but that's a different topic. When we compare across all of the experiments, Sarah Elmendorf wrote this up in a large and global analysis, we can see that, not surprisingly, there are winners and losers, and the winners are fairly tall shrubs, and losers are smaller plants and organisms like lichens and mosses. And what's quite interesting, you see this phenomenon in the warming experiments, but you see that this is nice proof of the concept, proof of the experiment. You can see a similar thing in the control plots over time. So with the warming in the open top chambers, you see this effect, the taller shrubs increase in abundance and height. But also over time, the control plots have warmed just due to plant warming. And there you also see a similar change, only to a lesser extent, of course, than in the warming experiments. And just an example for a plant that shows this plasticity that can grow very small and very tall, the dwarf birch in here in Alaska in a warming experiment. If you put up a large enough greenhouse, this grows 2-3 meters tall, whereas in other colder sites, the plant is just 50 centimeters tall. But if we compare the different sites all over the world, it's not a universal picture. So we have drier and wetter sites, and here you see the probability of those deciduous shrubs, so these tall shrubs, to increase in abundance. And you really see this mostly at wet sites. So if there's enough moisture, if it's warmer, and if there is moisture, water available for the plants, they can grow taller. If it's drier or even medium wet, the effect is much less pronounced. So it's quite important to know globally what the precipitation does, not only the temperatures. And related to that, the snow cover distribution is very important because a lot of water is stored there in the winter and then is available plants in springtime. Yes, here I spoke of a global analysis, but it's only small plots, square meter plots or so. So it's quite important to look at a larger scale if this change in vegetation is happening all over the place. And for that, remote sensing is really useful. So here you can see the trend in the Arctic in greenness in the NDVI. That's a greenness index to determine how many plants, and easy words, they grow and how green it is. And you can see that it's not a universal pattern at all. You see areas where it has greened a lot. And you see other areas where it has greened much less or where it's even brown. So global browning is an important phenomenon as well. So not everywhere plants grow taller, not even in the Arctic, even if it gets warmer. And the most likely reasons for these is drought. Like I said earlier, if it's dry, then the higher temperatures may not do much in terms of plant growth, or even cause the opposite effect, that you get a dieback of plants and drought and browning. What can also be a cause is fires, especially here in central Alaska. We have large fires, which is normal in general, but the dimension of fires also in Siberia that we've seen in the last years is unprecedented. It's beyond what we've ever seen before. So yes, just to clearly say that the patterns globally are very different and depend on the local conditions, not only temperatures, but also moisture. One study where we use remote sensing with a good Chinese colleague, Sheng-Wai Zhang, the paper is just out, is at a mountain in China, the border with Korea, North Korea, where we can see the upward migration on the mountain of a whole vegetation zone, so to say. The special case there is that we have an evergreen, rhododendron, Alpenrose, you have it in the Alps, in Italy and Switzerland as well. And the interesting thing is that it's really the dominant plant species on the mountain, but only in a certain zone. So here I have some papers that illustrate this. Here you have the central zone on the mountain where most of the area is covered by this plant. The white dots you see is the flowers. So this is the plant in flower. It's a white rhododendron, different from our red rhododendron in the Alps. And what you can see at lower elevation, this is a photo in autumn. You can see the evergreen rhododendron here, but you can also see other herbs that are now dead, but they will regrow in spring. And they seem to outcompete this rhododendron at lower elevation. At high elevation, you see encroachment, upward migration of this rhododendron. So with this change of a whole vegetation zone dominated by this one plant species, we have the possibility to use remote sensing to detect this upward migration. And we do here, so we can clearly see that towards the top of the mountain, it's getting greener. Oh, I have to say one important thing. Most remote sensing studies use summer maximum NDVI when it's greenest. Here, we use the NDVI in autumn because our plant here is evergreen, it's still green. The other plants, the larger herbs that will be very green and grasses that will be very green in summer are brown, like you saw in the photo, in autumn. So we can really distinguish rhododendron greenness and all the other stuff. So with this, we can see the upward migration, higher elevations getting greener because of rhododendron change, and browning at lower elevations, which is other plants, competitive plants, taking over plants from lower elevation. And I'm putting up this please don't Twitter sign because this the paper is just out, but I'm using here an older figure from an older version of the manuscript, which still needs to be updated. That'll apply later too, so please don't Twitter these figures. But the paper is available, so I can look at the original. I mentioned earlier that temperature, of course, is important in the changes that we see, but snow cover as well. And snow cover is often difficult to quantify in mountain regions. Here in this study on this mountain in China, we have data going back about 50 years, and we can see with a resolution of 30 meters the change of snow cover in April. I think it is the likelihood that you have snow cover in April, which represents the maximum time of snow cover. And you can see that over time, at lower elevation, the snow cover has largely disappeared in the last decades. And even at the highest elevations, 2,600 meters, the snow cover gets sparser and sparser. So we can see a clear effect of warming on the snow cover, a reduction in snow cover, and in a multiple regression analysis, we can identify the snow cover change as a main driver of the plant changes that we also see. So yes, snow is important, but like I said, oftentimes we don't have good information on changes of snow cover. And one trick we used in another project is use climate stations that is not intended to be used for ecological, biological research at all, but for avalanche research. So of these climate stations, we have over 100 in Switzerland. And like I said, they are being used to produce the avalanche bulletin, do the avalanche forecast, and these stations record temperatures, etc., and depth of the snow cover. And this happens with an ultrasonic sensor here, which records the distance between the sensor and the ground. So if it snows, we know how much it has snowed, and the data is being transmitted every half hour. So all the time we have updated, accurate snow research. Now, how can this be relevant or interesting for us biologists? At some point, we saw that this ultrasonic sensor here also runs in summer. Of course, the instruments don't get turned off. And the sensor also sees the grass growing. So here in this figure, you see the height sensor, the data from the height sensor, and you can see that at the end of May, the snow melts very quickly. It's getting warm, of course, and then the signal is at 0 for a while. Here is one interesting higher dot. So here it actually has snowed 8 centimeters or so in the beginning of June. But then something weird happens. So the signal slowly and linearly goes up until it reaches a certain height. And this is the plants growing at this site. So, so with this data, we can see when and how much the plants grow. And we use this to analyze environmental factors and their effect on plant. This is a unique data set. Such data would otherwise not be available. And it's only a byproduct of the avalanche science. So it's very fortunate for us. And just to analyze which factors are important for plant growth, we plot here the start of the vegetation onset, the observed vegetation onset compared to the predicted vegetation onset in our statistical model. And we can see here that there is a relationship with elevation. I should say these 100 climate stations cover a range of different elevations in the Alpine. The lowest is close to our institute at 1,530 meters, and they go up to nearly 3,000. So elevation is an okay predictor, but it's not fantastic. If we analyze surface temperatures, which we also have available on climate stations, the fit is much better, but really the best fit is if you analyze the timing of snowmelt and growing degree days above 0 degrees. So that is the sum of temperatures after the snow has melted above 0 degrees. That's what the plants really respond to most. So that's really what we need to be after. Here we have this for a set of climate stations, but in the future we should try to get much better in determining snow cover and changes of snow cover when we're interested in the future of alpine plants. We use this data in interpolations to produce maps for Switzerland, quantifying the change in the snowmelt timing in the 60s to 90s and at the end of the century, and the plant height and productivity now and at the end of the century. And we can see that snowmelt, this is using an older model, this paper is already a bit old now, a medium scenario conservative model, and we can assume that the snowmelt will be 2 to 3 weeks earlier, and that's probably conservative. It might be even more. And the biomass productivity might increase by 45%. So this is, in a way, bad news for our poor alpine plants that may not do well with competition, but it might also be good news for farmers in the Alpine. It might mean that agriculture, pastures, biomass production in the Alpine might become more important than it is today because productivity goes up, especially when it goes dry, when it gets drier and hotter in the lowlands. So jump over this real quick. Back to biodiversity. I spoke of vegetation changes in our tundra plots before, but we have other means nowadays to use big data sets to look at species turnover, and I'm going to move away a little bit from the Alpine now to other organisms and plants. We have one large project together with Aquatic Water Institute in Switzerland, where we analyze community turnover in phytoplankton and aquatic communities, fish communities, and in terrestrial communities, birds, butterflies, plants, etc. And we hypothesize that aquatic communities may respond differently, faster or slower to climate change, and that the size, for instance, of organisms also matters. And we do this with different data sets. So here, this is the global data sets, biotime data, which is from studies all over the world where they have repeat survey data. And we can see in this that terrestrial systems respond faster. So I should explain, this is the community thermophilization index. So the temperature that a community indicates, it tells us which plants grow there, which animals grow there, how warm it is. And with every degree of warming, those communities change. So that's what this figure shows. And we can indeed see a strong response in terrestrial systems and less so in aquatic systems. We did a similar analysis with Swiss data. And there we have a stronger response of aquatic communities, but we also see a big difference between insects, for instance, birds, plants, which in my view makes sense. Many insects really live in warm locations that are exposed to the sunshine, and if it warms, they might be able to respond much faster to warming. That is something that we see in another study as well from a former postdoc of mine, where we look at phenology. Phenology is the timing of events when a flower, when a plant flowers, when birds return in spring from the south, etc. And in this figure, you see how many days the phenology shifted. So that is here insects. This example, they on average develop 6 or 7 days earlier per decade, whereas residual birds have not responded much. And again, I would argue those organisms that live at locations where the sun hits, where it can warm up, where organisms can even profit from the warming, reptiles here, reptiles, insects, they are the most responsive group. Birds here, they respond, and I have to explain this short distance migrators. So these are the species that go south to Italy, maybe, and birds that can sense that it's getting warmer and return home earlier. Long distance migrators, these birds here, they go somewhere in Africa, and to them it matters rather what happens in Africa or on the way than what happens to the temperatures in Switzerland. They are not as directly responding, it seems, to warming. So although these data sets that I showed in the last 3 slides are very, very, very different, it seems that there are some common messages that show up despite the differences. Okay, but towards the end, I'd like to come back to our local land use structures in Switzerland, and that would apply to the Alps as well. Like I said, climate change is a big thing, and we see a lot of changes, but we also see that we have historical land use here that is responsible for a very high diversity in the Alps. So we have these extremely species-rich meadows with a lot of orchids that are only there because we have a moderate land use, not too much, not too little, not too heavy over-fertilization, but also no abandonment. So if we have no land use at all, you would have these shrubs, these alders all over the place, and not a colorful meadow. So I think it's quite important to remember, despite climate change, etc., that we have land use in place that can really, that has created high biodiversity over time, and that is probably able to maintain high biodiversity for quite a while. We study that in a new project in Switzerland also, where we analyzed the woody encroachment, the increase of shrubs and trees, and how this relates to changes in biodiversity. But where this is also relevant, where I have worked for many years, is in tourism. So this is a not so good example in Austria, where there are a lot of tourist activities and constructions, which is not necessarily beneficial for biodiversity. But after this bad example, I'd like to show a good example as well. This is in Zermatt, where you have a ski run. And there have been constructions here. There has been construction of snowmaking facility, but this has been restored, revegetated in a really environmental friendly way, and you hardly see anything. This is an object in the area that won a prize for a good example. I'll come back to that real quick. Here are some interesting examples from tourism nowadays in the Alps. And here you see the extent in Switzerland of transportation facilities, so where you have cable cars, etc. So although this is less than 1% of the area of the Swiss Alps, the total cover of these gondolas and funiculars, etc., is not so large, but you can see that you can access a lot of area. So skiers are able to get to a lot of areas in the Alps. It's also a universal problem. This is a photo from New Zealand. And the question is for us, in collaboration with practitioners, how can we avoid this? How can we restore these areas better to avoid erosion, maintain biodiversity, etc.? And just as one example where you can be active, we have a work group in Switzerland for high altitude restoration where researchers and practitioners work together. We wrote guidelines for practitioners of how to restore sites if you have a construction that is available in Italian, by the way, as well. We give prizes for positive examples, like I said before. We do seminars, etc. These are small things that we can do to improve our ecosystems in the Alps. And these are the guidelines that I mentioned before that are available in Italian as well. Here is another example, not in a ski resort, but along a road where there was construction along a road in Grisons, where they used one really good trick that I recommend. The machine here takes out turf with plants and plants this directly behind the machine. So you try to take the live material and try that it does not dry out and die, but that you plant it right away. And then you also look at the natural topography a little bit. So here you see a restored site, even a tree has survived here. You can see a shrub that died, but you see a shrub that survived. You don't have a very simple, even board of grass, but it looks really natural. And this is 1 year after the restoration measure. You hardly see where the construction was. So this is just to encourage people to see that despite requests we have to the environment, we are building roads, we are skiing, etc. There are different ways to deal with that environment. Evidence how much biodiversity matters also for soil erosion. We had one project many years ago, the PhD thesis of Mandy Paul, where we looked below ground, the few plants that grow here, how the roots grow below ground and how different plant species might be able to stabilize the ground. And this cartoon illustrates this well. We may have one plant species, indicated by one screw or nail, or we may have a lot of different growth forms that might be able to stabilize the soil better. This is a very simple hypothesis and very logical, but it has hardly ever been showed in nature. And we did this by analyzing small plots with a different number of plant species that you see here on the x-axis. And then we analyzed aggregate stability. And aggregate stability, for that we cored a soil sample, flooded this, and then the soil sample disintegrated. And this told us how stable the soil sample was. And you see this in this little example. Here it is with mycelia, with and without fungal hyphae. And you see how the one sample is more or less stable when you flood it, and the other core completely disintegrates. And that's what happens in nature as well. And I think I used my time. I was told I can tell anything, but not longer than 45 minutes. So I thank you for your attention, and I think there's room for discussion, which Michele, you will coordinate, direct. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks a lot, Christian. I try to clap my hands, not so virtually. And so thanks a lot. We really appreciate your presentation. And I think we are ready for some questions. On the chat we have several questions. So Christian, be ready. I don't know your plan for the afternoon, but okay. But we have a lot of questions, so be ready.
At some point, my daughter will run in and want to play with me, but you'll see.
Yeah, don't worry. No, I just tried to summarize a little bit what maybe I just as a way to break the ice. No, so I just put something in a presentation. I would like just to show my slide. I have to be careful to share my full screen because yesterday I missed this point. And okay, let me see. Now it's very, very little. I don't know why. Okay, should be fine. So I just put here something concerning what maybe some key points or take-home messages, but maybe Christian, you can add something more. So if we understood well, warming is the most pronounced in cold regions, Alpine region, the Arctic. Snow is a very sensitive sensor of climate change in these areas. Impact of temperature increase on plants is site-specific, so wet versus dry condition, for example, as you show us. And we don't have to miss the impact of land use change and land use intensity. Also, if I understand, if we kept well your talk. And what I also would like to stress personally, I really agree with you, the importance of long-term monitoring. Also the pleasure to discover old scientists, the heritage of these old scientist activities and discover their life, their activities. Personally, I've been involved in some scientists working on soils and glacier, and really impressive the amount of job they did, and to discover the old publication, maybe not available on PDF, you have to discover in the library and to such what we did in our early career. Then the importance of international efforts, experiments, networks, the importance to share common protocols to measure the same things in the same way in different places. But it seems obvious, but it's not so obvious. And personally, I am involved in this LTR network. You know, also in Italy we have this network, and just to remember the importance of long-term monitoring, also in a way to share data and to share the way we measure parameters. The importance of preserving and restore biodiversity. So not only the way we can do things in very sensitive environments, we are able maybe to apply some techniques in order to avoid or to reduce the impact of human activity. So thanks a lot also for this part of the presentation. And at the end, I just put this as an importance of joint forces, and also to be very open also to other field of research. And this PhD just represent a way to try to connect people also from different fields, so to join forces. Also join forces, maybe using, for example, sensor for the avalanche bulletin, and use this sensor in a way to have data concerning plant phenology. So it's very, as a paradigm of this, the importance to join forces and join experiences. And as I told you, Christian, so thanks a lot. This is just some main, I don't know if you agree, I just tried to put something, maybe it's not complete, I know,
Perfect.
But you say more and better than me, but I tried to summarize because maybe it could be, hopefully, just as ice breaking. But it's not necessary to break the ice, because during your talk, the chat was really active. So I tried to put some question here, maybe others just came, I don't know, but as a starting point, I read the chat and I put here some question from some participants. Of course, we could add more, or maybe if other people would like to add something more. I think now we are very open, Christian, no, for discussion, I don't know. So I just put this just as a starting point, as a warm up, okay? So Diego, for example, just ask, okay, you can see, sorry, I have a question about forests, so much they are going up to climate change. So Christian, if you can comment these first questions, thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks for the question. That's perfect, of course, because we have worked on tree lines as well. Yes, how much are they going up? That is a very difficult question. Of course, we can assume with climate warming, it gets colder by half a degree every 100 meters. So if it warms, say by the end of the century, 2 degrees, and it could be warm, we can assume that the tree line may be 400 meters higher, which is considerable. It is not easy to detect this at the moment, because trees are maybe a little bit picky in terms of the requirements that they need to move uphill, if you will. Because you oftentimes need a series of warm years that the trees need to flower, the fruits need to ripen, the seeds have to get higher, have to get there by the wind or by animals. Then the conditions need to be right for the plants to germinate. The small seedlings need to survive and then grow into taller trees. So in general, we know from treeline research that sometimes you need a series of warm years for trees to be really successful to establish at higher elevation. But then it might go really fast. So when we don't really see a lot at the moment, it has to do with several things. With this, what I just said, it might just be that in 10 years, we have a series of warm years, and then all of a sudden, the tree line is 300 meters higher. That's quite possible. But also, like I said, we have land use in the Alps, and as long as you have grazing, etc., these little seedlings may also be grazed. And we not only have land use, we also have abandonment in steeper parts of the Alps, and then you get taller shrubs, shorter grasses, where it's not easy for young trees, they start small, to establish. So you have several reasons why it's not going that fast. However, in the mountain top study, mountain summit study that I mentioned, we of course also looked at little trees, and we have historical evidence that on our mountains here in the Davos area, there was one single tree, and he really mentions that. He recorded 60 sites and mountains here, and there was one time he found a little tree. And when we started this, we went up the first mountain, 2,600 something meters, and we found 3 different tree species: large, a pine, 2 pines. No, it's spruce, a large, and a pine. And then we went on other mountains and found more little seedlings, saplings. So this is not a forest; these are individual trees. But this shows us that it's happening, it's starting. But it probably will take a while before we really have a measurable, visible increase in tree line. Globally, there's a paper by Melanie Harsh that shows that at half of the sites globally, you see evidence for an increase in tree line, and at half you don't, for the reasons just said. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Okay, thanks a lot, Christian. I don't know if Diego would like to add something more about it, or maybe satisfied by the answer.
He says thank you. Right.
Okay, so next is Wilfredo. I don't know, I have to share my screen again. Sorry, something doesn't work. What can we learn from changing vegetation in different mountain elevation through time? Can this data be used to create policies or regulation to mitigate the impact of climate change on natural ecosystem? It's a very, very big topic.
Yeah, not easy to answer. First of all, I would simply like to say that these alpine plants are very good indicators, like glaciers. You know, glaciers also indicate precipitation changes and temperature changes. So they integrate the different factors. Plants do that as well. They tell us a lot. What can we do in terms of policies? Again, it's a warning signal. So it shows us that even at highest elevations, where even in the Himalayas, where it's not easy to get, probably communities change. So this tells us that we should act politically, respectively, to avoid these negative changes and avoid biodiversity loss, species loss. But also in terms of mitigation, like I said at the end, we can do a lot with land use. If we have moderate land use, we can reduce the most competitive species and create space for smaller plants, not endlessly, within some limitations, of course. But with moderate land use, I think we can create space for quite a while, for quite a long time, for small alpine specialists. I have one example there in the Jura Mountains in northern Switzerland, where some of the mountains are really not tall, about 2,000 meters, some 1,700 meters. And without land use, you would have a beech forest. But there is some moderate to rather intense cattle grazing, actually, and they keep the forest away. And there are some really special, interesting alpine plants that have lived there probably since the ice ages. And for how long, I don't know. But normally, without land use, these plants wouldn't be there, and they are. So I think with the right appropriate amount of land use, moderate cattle grazing, it's all grazing by other animals, sheep, goat, we can mitigate some of the changes quite well, within limits, obviously.
Okay, Christian, thanks a lot. Wilfredo, if you would like to ask something more, if it's clear, so the floor is also for you. I don't know, Wilfredo.
Thank you so much. It is clear.
Okay, thanks again. And so I just have a question from Ottavia. Christian, can you read it? This increase in average temperature, the different growth rate is only due to biological, can be related to other factors. For example, to the growth of the trees, some way contaminated the areas. It's a very long and nice question, Christian. What do you think about it?
Other factors, yes. In our Summit Flora study, we really tried to address other factors as well, because climate change is so obvious. But we also took into account other available databases on nitrogen input from the air, for instance. And by far, climate change explained statistically the data best. We did other things. Not only did we use databases, when we went up the mountain, we were well aware that the local land use and the number of tourists, etc., may matter for the disturbance on the mountain. So on all mountains, we recorded indications for animals. Did we see cow pads, for instance? Is there a hiking trail going up? If it was an alpine peak with a book where people write down their names, we looked at that and counted the number of people, the number of visitors per year or a decade or however long the book dated back. So we accounted for that and also, and yes, that modified the results. So we had some evidence where we saw that on mountains with medium disturbance, again, we had most change of the species, most increase in species numbers. So if there were too many people, too many visitors, too many animals, the disturbance was too large, so you didn't have so much of an increase in species numbers. If there was too little, it was also not that strong. So with a moderate disturbance, again, you create gaps for germination. You also transport seeds up. Of course, when you're hiking, oftentimes we found some interesting species right at the top of the mountain where people do their picnic. So it's quite likely that with shoes, etc., with dirt, seeds are being transported up the mountain. So yes, this modifies the results, but nevertheless, overall, it's the climate warming that explained most variance on these.
Have to stop my screen because I didn't find my microphone. Sorry for that. I tried to, was really impressive. I tried to show my screen again. So because there are other questions, there are several, Christian. So for example, Luisa in Giorgio, what is CTI?
Oh, sorry, I tried to explain, but it was too fast. Community temperature index or community thermophilization index. So we can, at a given site, recall all plant species that grow there. We can do this at sea level. We can do that at 1,000 meters. We can do that at 2,000 meters. And we can relate that to the temperatures at the site. So the higher sites being colder. And then we can analyze a given site, a change over time. So our mountain summit, for example, has changed. Maybe we lost a few species, maybe some species have colonized the site, have invaded the site. And we can use the information, what a species stands for, what temperatures it indicates, to quantify the change over time. So we can say the community changed in a direction that indicates warmer conditions. And this value that we calculate from the community composition is the CTI. It's commonly used in species turnover studies. I hope that was better than the brief explanation during the talk.
Thanks a lot, Christian. Luisa, Giorgio, this is clear now. Yeah, I think so. Also to me, thanks a lot, Christian. Okay, Riccardo, would you say insects are the most resilient life form in respect to climate change?
Most resilient? No, I don't think I would. Although I'm speculating here. I said that some of them may respond rather quickly to climate change with a faster life cycle or earlier phenology, earlier development in the year. We have looked a little bit at grasshoppers, insects on mountains as well, how they, not only how they were hopping, but how they changed their distribution upwards. And we don't, although they can hop, they might be more mobile than plants. We don't necessarily see a faster upward migration than plants, because these animals, they also need to eat, right? So only when the habitat is right and when the plants are there that they are eating, their population can survive at higher elevation. So I would say insects are very responsive due to their life cycle, and also due to the fact that many insects have an annual life cycle, so grasshoppers especially. So they will respond very directly to warming, rather than alpine plants who are very long-lived. Many alpine plants live hundreds of years, although they are so small. More resilient, I would not necessarily say.
Okay, Christian. So now I stop my presentation because I go directly to the chat, okay? Because there are other questions coming to the chat. So I just read it for you and maybe we can read together. I don't know if you can have a look on. So, oh my God. So I have to be very precise. Okay, so, oh, mamma mia. Okay, so I think we arrive here. Yeah. So, Chiara Lanza, in addition to global warming, other effects are associated with climate change, such as extreme weather phenomena, more frequent storms, strong winds, wildfires, or do they affect alpine biota, these extreme weather events? Is it clear? Listen, sorry, maybe
yes.
Too fast.
No, it's good.
Storms, strong winds, wildfires in mountains, in alpine area.
All good. This is, yes, that's a very relevant, very interesting question. For instance, one extreme event I am also interested in is freezing events, because that can affect trees, but also smaller alpine plants. In some experiments, although as I said, these alpine plants are well adapted, I saw that in many years, if you have a freezing event in June, say, if the freezing event hits at a sensitive life stage, when the buds just burst or the flower buds just open, then they can well be damaged, even if the plant doesn't die, but it clearly affects the growth of the plant. And in a warming climate, we might of course, say when it gets warmer, then it's also less likely that an extreme event, a freezing event, hits, right? I'm gonna argue that way. This does not seem to be the case. With warming, we have earlier snowmelt. Then oftentimes plants develop earlier, phenology, earlier in spring. But then the likelihood that a freezing event hits after snowmelt is still high. This apparently doesn't necessarily have changed. So you have an earlier development of the plant, and then when freezing event hits, it may hit the plants harder. And that we've calculated for alpine plants, but we also looked at this for fruit trees. So also for agriculture, this is relevant. And we have seen this in wine and grapes, for instance, in recent years in Switzerland, where we had exactly that situation. You had a warm spring, the plants developed early. We loved the nice weather in spring, but then in April, May, we got severe frost, and the poor vineyards, the farmers there, lost sometimes 100% of their harvest or a major portion of their harvest because of such an extreme late frost. So I would argue when it's getting warmer, in many cases, the frost risk stays high, so it stays sort of the same. And because phenology is advanced, it may hit even harder. The consequences might be harder.
Okay.
That is only answering about frost, but take this as an example.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And Chiara, would you like to add something about it?
No, that's okay. Thank you. It was clear.
Of course. Okay, so now we move to, I think, Elena, for top mountain species that prediction tell us they are going to be extinct within the end of a century. Are there some kind of extra site conservation, habitat reconstruction to preserve these species?
Tricky. I would first of all repeat what I said earlier. So yes, of course, these alpine plants might be at risk. However, I would also repeat that we have this high heterogeneity of habitats. So, so far, despite warming, we haven't really had losses of alpine plants on our mountains. And what I showed earlier, on the Pitzlinat, where you had this one species 170 years ago, this species is still there and abundant, in fact, more abundant than it was 170 years ago. So we are not necessarily at the stage yet where we are losing species because of the mosaic, the high diversity of microhabitats. But with that, I don't want to say that those alpine plants are not threatened in the long term, especially when you go to lower mountains. Take Australia. There you have the tree line, and then you have 200-300 meters of alpine zone. And if there the tree line goes up 300 meters, then this is it. And they have indeed some habitats, snowbed habitats, fellfield habitats, so windy ridges that are very threatened. And there we see in some snowbeds, we see in warm years where the snow melts early, that from the sides, more competitive grasses encroach into the snowbed already. So you can see this almost on a year-to-year basis with snow, how the snow cover directly affects the competitors of these specialized snowbed species. Habitat reconstruction, no, very tricky. The only thing I can say is again, repeat what I said earlier. Think about a moderate kind of land use. So have some sheep grazing to push back the productive, competitive plant species to some degree to maintain space for these small alpine specialists. But artificially creating habitats, tell me why, I wouldn't know. Tell me how, I wouldn't know how this would work.
Okay, grazie Christian, thanks a lot. Elena, would you like to reply, to add something about it?
No, it's fine. It was just, yeah, because maybe now the species are still remaining there, and maybe they are a little moving, but in long projection, I mean, if there was some kind of prediction about that, but I know it's tricky, of course, to move some species from one place to another. Of course, it's not that, maybe it's not that possible, but yeah, it was just a curiosity. Thank you.
Transplanting, that is of course an interesting thing. I don't know if and when conservation will go to this. In forestry, this is happening already. We have the climate projections, and natural dispersal of trees is too slow to match climate change. So this is already happening, that tree species are being planted to sites where we think they will be able to grow in 50, 100 years. I have another interesting example, not from my field, from animals. The Vancouver Island marmot, cute animal, was highly threatened by, or is highly threatened by climate change on Vancouver Island. Because it's getting warmer, but also because of other factors. Shrubs are moving higher, and then predators of the marmot, wolves, they can better hide between shrubs and trees and kill the last remaining marmots there. So it's a complex of things that threatens these poor marmots there. But now they are really trying there with a lot of measures to save that animal, and those numbers have increased now from 30 to 120, which is still a ridiculously small number. If that can be successful in the long term, when we face a world that is 2 or 4 degrees warmer, I don't know. Very difficult to say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Christian. Very interesting topic also. And we have a question from Lorenzo. How is possible, if it is, to understand which is the right best balance between natural and agricultural land use to enhance biodiversity and ecosystem services? Balance between natural and agricultural land use for biodiversity and ecosystem services. If you have some comments or some ideas about it.
Yeah, so these colorful meadows that I've shown in the presentation, this is really probably the most extreme of low intensity agriculture. These historically, these meadows are not being fertilized, and the productivity is so low that they can only mow them every other year. So it's not even enough productivity to cut the grass or the plants every year. But this moderate low intensity land use produces this very high biodiversity. And this is nowadays only working with subsidies from the government. So there it is really effective, I would say, for the moment, that with subsidies, this historical land use is being kept up. Like I said, in the case of the Jura Mountains, the land use intensity was actually much higher. So I was surprised to see how many cows there were per hectare to keep away the beech forest in favor of these alpine, subalpine meadows. There is no general answer to this. So it has to be a mosaic of different land uses, and we have to produce food, of course. So this has to be looked at in a specific context.
Okay, thanks again, Christian. Lorenzo, would you like to reply or ask something more about it? No, apparently no. So we have a question from Simone. 2 questions. So we start for the first one, Christian. If you can have some ideas about the response of high altitude wetlands like peat bogs to climate change. If you work on this kind of habitat, I don't know, Christian, you didn't show us results, but maybe you have some expertise also on it. Peat bogs and wetlands, or we react to climate change, if you have any information.
Yes. I would say that those will of course respond more to changes in precipitation. So for the Swiss case, which I know best, the largest extensive peat bogs are in the Northern Alps, where you have most precipitation. There are wonderful peat bogs, but many of them are being mown again extensively as well. If it gets warmer, these sites might also get drier, but if the precipitation stays that high, I would think that they could sustain for quite a while. Apart from that, I have not studied peat bogs in a long time, so I can't give a very detailed answer to this.
Thanks a lot, Christian. So I think we can move to the second question. So now we are seeing an increase in taxonomic biodiversity, more species, but what about functional diversity? In a warmer climate, species can increase in general, but there is the risk to lose rare and cold adapted species that can play a fundamental role in high altitude ecosystems. I repeat, sorry, did you keep the most of it?
Yes, I'm with you, and I see the chat as well. So I can
sorry, Chris, I would just like to moderate, but if you go, you can go on your own.
Both is helpful, so it's good. So I've got the question. So yes, yes, I would of course agree. Like I showed in the study of plant species and functional diversity of root systems, the more diverse, the higher your functional root diversity is, the more likely it is that you can prevent erosion, that you can stabilize the soil. And I would argue that the alpine plants play a very important role there, because oftentimes they are very small, but the roots go very deep. So in general, we can generalize that with alpine plant species, the root to shoot ratio is very different from lowland plants. So in relation to the whole plant biomass, the roots are much larger. So yes, they will stabilize the soil well. So I would agree that functional diversity is very important. Yes, and we don't want to lose those high alpine specialists.
Okay, so is it fine for the answer? Would you like to add something?
Yes.
Simone, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi to everyone. Just to understand if I would like to know if like we have more species in a high altitude ecosystem because the climate is warmer, but these species maybe are also more competitive than cold adapted species. So maybe these species in the long term, they can outcompete the alpine specialist species, let's say. And I would like to know if this can be a risk, and because these alpine specialists could be functionally diverse from the other species, this could be the loss of the species could be a big loss for the ecosystem. Just that.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. I think when I showed the increase of species numbers in Europe, this is probably only half of the story, again, because our mountains are basically high enough. So we haven't lost any or many species yet. We have an increase in species numbers. We also have a homogenization of the vegetation on summits. So that is functionally important as well. The species that are moving up are more competitive, yes. They are also more generalist species. So the mountain in a way is becoming less special, less unique. So the species in the long term that we'll lose are probably more special than the species that we gain. So that is the downside when I only show species numbers. We have to look at which species these are, of course. And I think in the long term, when all of these alpine plants are really at risk, is when we have a certain threshold. So for a while, we have this diversity of habitats, and a lot of species can coexist also functionally. If the temperatures rise high enough that we have a tall shrub cover of shrubs that are 1 meter tall or something, then of course we lose this differentiation of different habitats when the tree line goes up. If we have a forest and we have a forest that covers most of the area, then we lose the habitat of species. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. At some point we have a certain threshold when this argument is not true anymore, that we have a diversity of habitats. And when this is, that is very difficult to say, because if you model this, it depends on whether your grid size that you're modeling is 1 square meter or, or 10 by 10 kilometers. This is improving, of course, if you have a 100-meter grid cell. Still, in a 100-meter grid cell, you have a lot of different habitats, or you lose species. So there the approach matters really a lot. It's very difficult to say when this threshold is reached.
Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions when we end in 5 minutes, because also, Christian, you have a very busy afternoon, I know. So I promise just a couple of questions more when we stop, because as we plan, we have to stop at 1 p.m. So don't worry, Christian. So a few more questions. One by Giorgio. Are there any study linked to elevation-dependent warming? Giorgio studied it in his master thesis. So mountains are getting warmer and warmer, more than other place in our world. Would like to add something concerning the elevation-dependent warming, if you are aware of some studies, if you...
Right. I would argue that, like I showed, in cold systems, the temperature is a very important factor, and when we warm, then we have a more rapid species turnover. And at lower elevation, we might see similar things, but there again, you have land use. And for example, in Switzerland, if we look at species turnover at lower elevation, really there, the most important signal we see is fertilization and nitrogen input from the air. So I think it's fair to say that the effect of temperature and of warming is more pronounced at high elevation, and at lower elevation, even though temperature warming happens there as well, other factors are oftentimes outweighing the temperature effect and the effect of warming.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Again, there is a question by Chiara and Silvia. Both they ask something concerning alien species, invasive species, you know, this very large topic. So if climate change have any effect on the diffusion, on the spread of this alien and non-autochthonous species, so to say.
Yes, I would say increasingly it's a problem. In general, it hasn't been a big problem yet, because where do you get invasive species? You get them in the lowlands, from roads, from ships. So most invasive species are being transported from the lowlands to the lowlands. So it's a bit of a step to move uphill, to move up the mountain. And normally you don't have dispersal or invasion of species from a mountaintop to a mountaintop. How could they get there? It could happen, but it's just not very likely. And the most extreme example I see is an Asian poppy, Papava, that I have found on a Davos mountain here at 2,800 meters. That is, in my view, the highest record of an invasive species on an alpine summit. And that, it's really beautiful, but it is invasive. And I know some sites where this is spreading quite a lot. So this could become a problem. The other thing that is clearly happening in the Mirren, there's another international initiative on invasive species in mountain areas, is that species invade the mountains along roads. That's also an obvious thing. From the lowlands, but the roads go into the mountains, and then of course also lowland or generalist species can invade higher elevations. And this is happening. There are some large initiatives going on to see that this is happening. Usually this happens along the roads, and we don't see a lot that they really go into the ecosystems away from the road. But this may, of course, only be a matter of time. What we see quite a bit at mid-elevations, so Davos, for instance, we see the giant Heracleum increasingly, the poisonous plant. I don't know if you knows this, that causes skin rash. That is on our warning list, so that is being removed if we ever see it. So this is quite on the rise, I would say. There are some other examples of a Brassicaceae, Bunias, it is called. In my time, the last 20-something years in Davos, we have seen that along roads, and now we see all of a sudden that it's sort of everywhere. It's a yellow flower. It grows a bit like rape. So this seems to be invading meadows right now. It's happening right now. So I would say, in general, mountains are less vulnerable than lowland habitats. Take New Zealand. You know, if you go to a new dune system in New Zealand, you see almost exclusively European plants. Ridiculous. This is much less in mountain systems, but this.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. I don't know. Do we have time for one more question or not? Is a question from Lilja, which concerns CO2, impact of CO2, you know, on the growing of plants, because you have I know that you did a lot on this topic, so maybe I just stress you with this last question because I know that you did a lot of job on it.
That's right. That is a very good question, and it's true. We did an experiment at Treeline with warmer temperatures and with elevated CO2. So we fumigated trees and shrubs with elevated CO2 to have a CO2 concentration of 550 ppm, which is what we expect for 2050, roughly. And trees grew a little bit more with the CO2. So you may say that you have some enhanced carbon sequestration, but it was not a very strong effect. What we also saw as we did a whole ecosystem analysis, we not only looked at the plant growth, but my colleague Frank Hagedorn also recorded the respiration from the soil. So what are the microbes doing in the soil? And with the elevated CO2 treatment, we also had higher respiration from the soil. So we fix a little bit, we sequester a little bit with enhanced plant growth. Also, the microbes are more active, especially when we warm in combination with this. And by that, we lose more carbon from the soil. So the net effect might be zero. Or we might even, because there's more carbon stored in the soil than in plants above ground, we may even see a net loss of CO2. So my hopes that with elevated CO2, we have more plant growth, and with that, more carbon sequestration, we take out more CO2 from the atmosphere. My hopes are not that high in that respect. I wouldn't count on that to save our planet. Sorry about
okay, thanks a lot. Grazie, Christian. So I really thank you for your lecture. It was really interesting, of course, and also for my patience and for your answer. On the other side, I would like also to thank all the audience, because now we have more than 100 people connected and very stable signal, you know, is a good sign, as you know. Not less than 100, very constant. And also, believe me, there are, as you can see in the chat, still active. So I really also would like to thank the audience for being so active in putting questions. And so I think I'm really satisfied about this morning session. So Christian, I don't want to waste your time more than that. I know that you are very busy afternoon with your with the kids. And what to say, we have another session in the afternoon at 3 p.m. So I really invite all the participants to attend this afternoon session. And of course, I thank again Christian. It's been really a pleasure. Enjoy your lunch, enjoy your afternoon. And thanks Sarah again for the time you dedicate to us. Okay, so I try to clap my hands, and I don't know if the other would like to switch on the microphone, and maybe we can try just to be a little bit more in contact, not so virtually.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You can hear us.
Almost not like a Zoom anymore. It's almost like an in-person meeting.
Next time in person, we have to really organize it. Okay, hopefully.
If you want, Michele, if there are lots of more questions, you can of course collect them and send them to me. If people would really like a reply.
Okay, so I can just prepare a list of questions and send to you. What do you think? Would be nice.
And if it's too much for me, I can still say no. But if I can manage, I'm happy to answer.
No, you don't have to promise. It's just an opportunity. If you have time and maybe some question, we'd like to. Okay, not all, because it's very positive, you know. But maybe it's not possible to answer to everybody. Okay. So Christian, grazie mille.
Grazie mille.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye.
Arrivederci a tutti. Oggi alle 3, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, same place, please. Remember.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye everyone. Ciao Cristian.
Scusate, possiamo vederci 5 minuti?
Sorry. Paolo, please go ahead. Yes.
No. Just instead of 3 o'clock, if we can meet maybe 10 minutes in advance just to check the presentation that everything is going okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Paolo.
This is for the organization people, not for students.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Paolo. Bye.
So, scusa Paolo, Michele e gli altri. Allora io apro la riunione in maniera che voi possiate entrare anche prima delle 3.
Ottimo,
okay.
Sì, perfetto.
Però una cosa, io non so se arrivo prima di quella riunione, quindi partite tranquillamente e poi eventualmente attivate la registrazione alle 3. Ok?
Ok,
va bene.
Possiamo attivarla anche noi senza
sì, do l'autorizzazione a Cristina, va bene?
Ok, mi lasci me organizzatore. Ok, perfetto. Benissimo.
Ciao.
Allora 10 minuti prima delle 3, va bene?
Perfetto, grazie mille Cristina.
Mario, scusami solo una questione, la chat, adesso se chiudi la sessione rimane in memoria o devo copiare adesso? Mi lasci aperto la chat perché per copiare le domande.
Io ti
Scusami
mando...
la domanda stupida magari, però non
no,
so
ma che figurati, mando c'è il file con le chat di tutti. Io adesso vi giro quello che ho mandato agli studenti, che è il link alle registrazioni e alla chat. E poi c'è un piccolo passcode che dovete copiare e incollare per accedere.
Quindi posso dare questo link a Christian con le passcode, lui poi risponde, siccome si è reso disponibile volevo approfittarne.
Ok, va bene. Molto bene. Cristina, potresti disattivare lo streaming YouTube?
Sì.